let's talk about a 16th century French nobleman who, after basically ghosting the world, did something truly radical. He decided to explore himself. And in doing that, he didn't just invent a new way to write, he kind of invented a new way for all of us to understand ourselves.
Oh, the essay. We all know it, right? From that high school assignment you dreaded to the articles you scroll through on your phone every day. It's just everywhere. It almost feels like it's always been a part of how we share ideas. But it hasn't. Not at all.
I mean, somebody had to invent it. And the story of its invention is really the story of one man trying to get a handle on the most confusing and complicated subject of all. Okay, picture this. At 38 years old, totally burned out from public life, this guy, Michel de Montaigne, basically locks himself away in his library. We're talking a tower surrounded by about 1,500 books. And there, he started a project so weird, so completely new, it would literally change writing forever. He decided to study, that's right, himself. He decided to make his own messy, contradictory mind the subject of his book. Now, you got to think about this for a second. This was an age of writing about God, about kings, about epic poems, writing about your own random thoughts. It was unheard of, kind of scandalous even. So what did he actually create up there in that tower? Well, to get it, we have to start with the name he gave these writings. And honestly, it's surprisingly humble. He called them essays. Now, to us, an essay sounds formal, structured. But back then, in 16th century French, an essay was just an attempt, a trial, a test run. See, he wasn't trying to prove some grand final point. He was just trying out his thoughts on paper, seeing where they would take him. Before Montaigne, if you were going to write seriously about ideas, you wrote a treatise. Think of something like Machiavelli's The Prince. It's formal, it's structured, and it's there to prove a point with absolute authority. Montaigne's essays were the total opposite. They were relaxed, personal, and they wandered all over the place. He wasn't building a fortress of certainty. He was more like creating a playground for doubt. So this begs the question, right? Who was this guy who had the nerve to turn the camera around and point it at himself? Let's get to know him a little. Montaigne had a pretty good life. He was born rich, he was a successful statesman, but his whole world was turned upside down in 1563 when his best friend, Etienne de la Bouée, died. And a lot of people think that this profound, devastating loss is exactly what drove him out of public life and into the private world of his own head. I mean, just listen to how he described their friendship. When La Bouée died, that incredible connection was just gone. So in a way, the essays became his new conversation partner. He was writing to figure things out, and we, the readers, get to take the place of his lost friend. Right in the preface to his book, he basically gives you a warning label. He's saying, look, this isn't about grand political theories or philosophy. This is about me. It's about how all those big ideas look and feel through the filter of one messy, complicated, totally human guy, himself. So what does this all look like on the page? Let's take a look at one of his most famous essays, which is, frankly, still pretty shocking today. So at the time, Europeans were encountering the indigenous peoples of the Americas, and the common view was that they were just primitive savages. Montaigne heard an account from a man who had actually lived in what is now Brazil, and he decided to do something wild. He decided to take that whole assumption apart, piece by piece. His whole argument was so simple, but so powerful. He basically said, hey, we Europeans are just judging another culture by our own rulebook. What we call barbarism, he argued, is really just difference, things we're not used to. For the 1500s, this was an absolutely mind-blowing idea. And this is where he really twists the knife. He doesn't ignore the fact that these tribes practiced a form of ritual cannibalism. But then he holds up a mirror to his own so-called civilized society, which was in the middle of these horribly brutal religious wars. And he asks this devastating question: who's the real savage here? The person who eats their enemy after they're already dead? Or the person who tortures their living neighbor over a disagreement about God? Oof. This willingness to question everything, even the idea that his own culture was superior, is really the foundation of Montaigne's entire philosophy. You see, at his core, Montaigne was a skeptic. Now, that doesn't mean he didn't believe in anything. It means he was deeply, deeply suspicious of certainty. He just saw human nature as too messy, our ability to reason as too flawed, to ever say we found the absolute final truth. For him, anyone who claimed they had all the answers wasn't smart, they were just arrogant. He actually boiled this whole worldview down into a personal motto, a question that kind of echoes through all 107 of his essays. Que sais-je? What do I know? And this isn't him saying, I'm ignorant. No, no. It's an embrace of humility. It's the starting point for being truly curious, instead of just ending with a rigid final answer. So, a French nobleman from 500 years ago, why are we still talking about him? Well, because that simple attempt to get to know himself ended up changing pretty much everything. Seriously, his influence spread like wildfire. Francis Bacon picked up the essay form and made it a staple in English. Shakespeare read him. You can totally hear echoes of On the Cannibals in his play The Tempest. And for centuries, philosophers from Blaise Pascal to Ralph Waldo Emerson wrestled with his ideas. He didn't just invent a type of writing. You could argue he helped invent the modern way of thinking about ourselves. And that, ultimately, is his legacy. He gave us a model for how to think, a way that values asking questions more than having all the answers, and looking inward more than just blindly believing what you're told. He showed us that maybe the greatest journey of discovery we can take is the one into our own minds. And that brings us right back to today. I mean, think about it. We live in a world just saturated with hot takes and people who are 100% certain about everything. Montaigne's 500-year-old question feels more important than ever. Before we type that comment, before we share that article, before we jump into an argument, maybe we should all just pause for a second and ask ourselves that simple, humbling question, what do I really, truly know?